that needs it. So separately on your mobile or your tablet, log in, then choose Enable Audio Output to hear your language. So we need to provide you with the www.transit.it. It will be shown in the screen in just a moment. We're giving people a few minutes to do that. And there it is. It's www.translate.it/AIWDQ. I'm going to give the audience, the viewers, a few minutes to try that out if they need it. Okay, this is a great translator for those that need a different language and a preference for someone that is either needs something in Spanish for them or French. We've tried it, and it actually offers all these different languages. That is amazing, I thought. I don't know if anyone has used it, but I thought that was a great feature for everyone to use. And so how this works, as a presenter, who is Marc Zine, will be presenting this webinar regarding the IRS. And as he goes along, it will translate again in Spanish, and there will be subtitles. And whoever needs that translate, they can use it as well on their tablet or on their mobile phone. So I think we've given enough time for people to log in. Marc, I'd like to present you Marc Zine from the IRS in California. Marc, can you say hello? And
hey, good afternoon, everybody. Mm-hmm. And are we going to put up our slides?
Yes, we are. Give us a minute. And it looks like it's uploading.
There we go. That's what we were looking for. Thank you, Stephen. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Marc Zine. I'm an IRS Stakeholder Liaison coming to you today from Sacramento, California. Stakeholder Liaison is a branch of IRS Communications and Liaison, and we manage the services relationships with stakeholder organizations. And I'm glad to count the Nevada Department of Business and Industry, the Department of Consumer Affairs, and Chris Williams as a valued partner, who I thank for their invitation to speak to you today. I know that many of you out there today belong to a government agency, a business or community-based organization, and I would ask that you consider sharing some of the information you learned today with your own communications networks. I also know that many of you probably have lots of questions regarding the economic impact payment, and I'm hoping that most of them will be covered in my remarks. If not, please use the chat feature and I'll try to answer as many questions as time permits. So let's get started. Next slide. So you can see here all of the topics that I'm going to talk about today. And they include eligibility, implementation, the Get My Payment tool, the non-filers tool, scam protection, resources and guidance, and the latest updates. What I'd like to do is handle the questions that come in based upon each one of these topics. So I'll talk about a topic like eligibility. If you have a question about that, go ahead and type it in the Q&A chat box, and we can take a look at that after I get through with my remarks on that topic, and then we'll just move forward with each one after that. So can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so I'm sorry, Stephen, can we go back to the first slide? Let me go ahead and actually explain the slide before this one. There we go. Next one, number 2 or 3, I guess it is. That's the one I'm looking for. Left it a little too quickly. So first of all, before we move on, let me explain what the economic impact payment is. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, commonly now known as the CARES Act, provides various COVID-19 relief provisions, including the recovery rebates for individuals in 2020 totaling about $300 billion. So for tax year 2020, this year, the Act provides for a refundable credit against 2020 tax liability of up to $1,200 for individuals and up to $2,400 for married couples who file jointly, based on the amount of adjusted gross income reported, with an additional $500 for eligible dependents under age 17. Now, recognizing the need for individuals to receive this financial relief now, rather than based on the filing of a 2020 tax return sometime in 2021, the Act provides for the advance payment of the recovery rebate in 2019, which is officially referred to as the economic impact payment by the IRS. You might ask, who will get the money? Well, adult U.S. residents that meet established income limits are eligible to receive money from the government. This includes taxpayers, people who filed a federal tax return for 2018 or 2019, retirees, people who get Social Security, railroad, or other retirement benefits, beneficiaries, people who get public benefits like SSDI, disability, or veterans benefits, and non-filers. Those are people who do not have to file a federal tax return because they haven't met the threshold of gross income for filing a return. So those are people who either made no income or made less than $12,200 in 2019 for individuals or $24,400 for married couples. So how does the IRS determine who is eligible to receive the 2020 recovery rebate now rather than waiting until 2021? Let's talk about the eligibility criteria next. So next slide. So who is eligible for the recovery rebate? Well, an eligible individual is someone who is a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, that is somebody with a green card, or a qualifying resident alien. Someone who wasn't claimed or could have been claimed as a dependent on someone else's return, someone who has adjusted gross income below an amount based on their filing status, and someone who has a social security number that's valid for employment, with this exception for married couples filing a joint tax return. If either spouse is a member of the U.S. Armed Forces at any time during the taxable year, then only one spouse needs to have a valid SSN, not both of them. So eligible individuals with adjusted gross income up to $75,000 for single filers, $112,500 for head of household filers, and $150,000 for married filing jointly are eligible for the full $1,200 payment for individuals and the $2,400 payment for married filing jointly. In addition, they're eligible for an additional $500 per qualifying child under age 17 who could be claimed as a dependent. For filers with income above those amounts, the payment amount is reduced by $5 for each $100 above the adjusted gross income thresholds based on the filing status. So filers with income exceeding $99,000 for single, $136,500 for head of household, and $198,000 for joint filers are not eligible and will not receive the payments. So we're on slide number 5 now. How is the IRS going to implement the delivery of the economic impact payments? Well, implementation, as I mentioned earlier, the CARES Act provides for the advance payment of the recovery rebate in the form of an economic impact payment now. So whether the recovery rebate is provided as an economic impact payment in 2020, this year, or as a tax credit on the 2020 tax return filed in 2021, next year, depends on several factors. Whether the eligible individual or married couple filed returns with qualifying income prior to 2020, whether they aren't typically required to file tax returns because their income doesn't meet the filing thresholds, and whether they're recipients of certain benefits from the Social Security Administration, Railroad Retirement Board, or Veterans Administration. So let's break these down. First, did the individual or married couple file a tax return for 2019? If they did and it processed, then the IRS will look at the adjusted gross income of that return to determine if they qualify and base the amount of the economic impact payment on the filing status and the number of eligible dependents under age 17. If they haven't filed a 2019 return yet that hasn't processed, then we're asking, did the individual or married couple file a tax return for 2018? If they did, then the IRS will look at the adjusted gross income of the 2018 return to determine if they qualify and base the amount of the economic impact payment as described. Now, if no tax return was filed for 2019 or 2018, would the otherwise eligible individual need to wait until 2021 to claim the recovery rebate on a 2020 tax return? Well, not necessarily. So if the individual or married couple has a filing requirement for 2019, they should file the tax return as soon as possible, certainly by the extended due date of July 15th. And assuming they meet the adjusted gross income requirements, they'll receive an economic impact payment in 2020 based on the filing status and number of eligible dependents under age 17 as reported. If they didn't have a filing requirement for 2019, then the same would apply for 2018 if there was a filing requirement for that year. They should file a 2018 tax return as soon as possible. Generally, the filing requirement for 2019 for single taxpayers is gross income of at least $12,200. Married filing joint taxpayers have a filing requirement if gross income is at least $24,400 and $18,350 for head of household. Note that there are many other reasons that trigger the requirement to file a tax return, regardless of gross income, such as having net self-employment income of $400 or more. Also, lower income filers should look on irs.gov for free return preparation and filing options. They should search free file on irs.gov. Now, in what manner and method will individuals receive their economic impact payment? Well, it all depends on the facts and circumstances. Let's take a look at each of the situations I described a minute ago, and I'll explain how they would receive their payment. To begin with, let me advise that in the absence of any direct deposit information, either from a previously filed tax return or using one of the online tools provided by the IRS, which I'll talk about later, the economic impact payment will be delivered by mail, which could significantly delay receipt of the payment. Now remember, the most common situation is the one where individuals already filed a tax return for either 2019 or 2018. So if eligibility is based on the 2019 return because it's already been filed and processed, and there's a refund on the return where direct deposit to a U.S. financial institution was requested, then the payment will be direct deposited to that financial account. If the tax return used to determine eligibility wasn't a refund return with direct deposit financial account information, then there are two scenarios for delivery. One is to send the check by mail, and the second is to try to use another electronic method called the Get My Payment tool to identify a bank account for direct deposit. I'll talk more about the Get My Payment tool later. Individuals or married couples who do have a filing requirement but haven't filed for either 2019 or 2018 should file as soon as possible and identify a bank account for direct deposit, even if the return they're filing doesn't have a refund. These people will have until the end of 2020 to file a tax return in order to obtain the payment. Otherwise, it'll need to be claimed as a tax credit on the 2020 return, assuming that the income reported on the 2020 return qualifies. Now, what about those Social Security, Railroad Retirement, and Veterans Administration recipients who don't file returns because they don't have a requirement to file? Well, they'll receive their $1,200 economic impact payments in the same manner that they receive their benefits checks. Direct deposit to a financial account, loaded onto a direct express card, if that's their delivery method, or by check in the mail. They don't need to file a tax return or use the non-filer tool, which I'll also talk about later, to declare their eligibility. And finally, for those individuals who don't have a filing requirement for 2019 or 2020, in addition to using the non-filer tool to declare their eligibility, including for dependents, they can also identify a financial account for direct deposit of the economic impact payment, so they don't have to have it mailed. So there's a couple questions. Let's see if I can take those now.
Okay.
Somebody is asking if a taxpayer owes child support and his refund normally goes to his ex-wife in whole or in part, who gets the stimulus payment? How can he obtain his payment or his share? Does he need the help of an IRS staff person, or can he resolve this online somehow? Well, the simple answer to that question is that there's only one scenario where the IRS will withhold the payment. We're not going to hold the payment to pay back federal taxes or other federal obligations. However, we will hold back the stimulus payment if there's back child support. And so in that scenario, there really isn't anything that the person who owes the back child support, but who was otherwise going to get the stimulus payment can do. Unless, there is a discrepancy in the amount owing, then they're going to have to contact the IRS. But the payment will have already been withheld and diverted over to whatever fund is used to transfer the back child support to the other spouse. The other question here from the same attendee is if a person's 2018 tax return was filed and processed, but the 2019 return was filed fairly late or an amendment was necessary, so it has not been processed, can the taxpayer get an electronic payment or enter bank account information if not included on 2018 to get one? So the answer to that is yes. So if the 2018 return qualifies the taxpayer for the economic impact payment, they can use something called Get My Payment tool, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. And they'll be given an opportunity to provide the bank account information so that they can get a direct deposit. That will only work if the 2018 return wasn't a refund return that didn't already have direct deposit information on it. If the 28 return did have direct deposit information on it, that's the financial account that we're going to use to send the economic impact payment to. Okay, so that's it for the questions. And can we move on to the next slide? Okay, let me spend a few minutes now then talking about the Get My Payment tool, which I've already referred to a few times. This is an electronic application on the IRS website, irs.gov, that allows potential recipients of the economic impact payment to do two things. They can use the tool to check the status of their economic impact payment, such as whether it's scheduled for direct deposit or delivery by mail. If a direct deposit refund return was filed, that was used to determine eligibility, that would be for either 2019, if already filed and processed, or the 2018 return. then the tool provides the last 4 digits of the financial account where the payment is scheduled to be deposited. So for example, if eligibility is based on the 2018 return that did have a refund that was direct deposited, the payment will be deposited to the bank account identified on that return. You should note that the Get My Payment tool, in order to prevent fraud, does not allow the recipient to update existing financial account information that's been pulled from a previously filed refund return, nor does it allow you to change your mailing address. I should also note here that Social Security and Railroad Retirement Board retirees can also use the Get My Payment tool to determine their status, and that the IRS is readying the upload of data for SSI and Veterans Administration payments recipients, so they can use the tool to track their economic impact payment as well. That information should be uploaded later this week and next week. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was that the tool also allows individuals and married couples who filed tax returns for 2019 or 2018, whichever is the later return filed and processed, to identify a financial account for direct deposit if the return used to determine eligibility didn't have a refund on it that was direct deposited. So for example, if eligibility is based on the 2018 return that had a balance due, no balance due, or a refund where no direct deposit information was provided, then the Get My Payment tool will allow for the input of financial account information for direct deposit of the EIP. So how do you access the Get My Payment tool? The link is on the irs.gov homepage, very easy to find. To obtain status, the individual needs to enter their social security number, their birth date, their street address, and their zip code. The system will return one of the following 3 status messages. So one message could provide the payment status, in which case a payment has been processed, a payment date is available, and payment is to be sent either by direct deposit or mail, or a different message saying you're eligible, but a payment has not been processed and a payment date is not available yet. Once the payment is processed, the additional delivery information will be shown in the tool. Now, a second message could say that payment status is not available. This means that we can't determine your eligibility for a payment at this time, usually because a 2018 or 2019 return hasn't been filed, or you simply may not be eligible based on the adjusted gross income threshold or other qualifiers, or you use the non-filer tool and we haven't processed your entry yet. A third message could say that we need more information. This generally means you're eligible for a payment, but we don't have your direct deposit information. At this point, the individual who filed a return for 2018 or 2019 that was used to determine eligibility for the payment, where it wasn't a refund return with direct deposit information, will now have the opportunity to enter financial account information for direct deposit. However, if the tool doesn't offer you the option to provide your direct deposit information, it most likely means that the IRS will mail your economic impact payment. Now, in order for these individuals to add financial account information, they need to further validate identity by providing information from their most recently filed and processed 2019 or 2018 tax return, which includes the adjusted gross income reported and the amount of the balance due or refund that wasn't direct deposited. If the adjusted gross income was negative, that amount should be entered without minus signs or parentheses. If there was no balance due or refund, you can select either I received a refund or I owed money, but just enter 0 for either the refund amount or the amount you owe. Once this identity check is passed, then the financial account information can be entered. That includes the type of account, checking or savings, a routing number, and an account number. The individual can also choose to have the payment delivered to a prepaid debit card. The financial institution that administrates the card can provide routing and account numbers, and the type of account for a prepaid debit card would be checking, not savings. If you enter your bank account information and get my payment any day until noon on Tuesday, your payment date will be available beginning the following Saturday in Get My Payment. If you enter your bank account information after noon on Tuesday, your payment date should be available beginning the Saturday after next in Get My Payment. There may be times when your payment may be sent by mail because the payment was already in process before the bank account information was entered. If this is the case, then typically it'll take up to 14 days to receive the payment. So again, as a reminder, where the IRS doesn't have direct deposit information, the economic impact payment will be delivered by mail. If we issue a direct deposit and the bank information is invalid or the bank account has been closed, the bank will reject the deposit and we will then mail your payment as soon as possible to the address we have on file for you. Get My Payment will be updated to reflect the date your payment will be mailed. Typically, once the payment is mailed, it'll take again up to 14 days to receive the payment. We have another question in the chat box from John, who's asking, in the case of a deceased person receiving a payment, what do their relatives do to return the payment? So that's been a question that's been frequently asked, and yes, payments have actually been delivered to deceased taxpayers where we probably haven't had information indicating that they had passed away. In any event, the IRS is saying that those payments should not be kept and that the payment should be returned to the IRS. So returning it to the IRS depends on a couple things. If it was direct deposited, then you would need to issue a personal check or a money order payable to the Treasury for the amount of the deposit, and then send it to the service center, the refund inquiry unit of whatever service center normally processes your tax return. We just posted a frequently asked question on this topic on irs.gov today, which does identify the address of each service center, depending on what state you live in, where the payment should be returned. Now, if the payment was sent by check, then you should not cash the check, just write void on the check and then return it in the same manner that, that I already described. If the check was already cashed and deposited, then you'd follow that same method that I just discussed for returning with a personal check or money order. So we had another question. Does Get My Payment tool allow a person to update mailing address? Some people are quarantining away from home these days or just may have moved. So before I answer that, my mouth is getting a little dry. Let me get a little water here. So I think, as I mentioned, for security purposes, the Get My Payment tool does not allow a person to update their mailing address. We did that in order to prevent fraud, because the first access to the tool is simply a social security number and a birth date. Those are information items that are not hard to get. And so if that information, somebody accessed using that information, were allowed to change their mailing address, they could possibly divert a payment. We even think that with income information like adjusted gross income, the amounts of refund or balance due on a previously filed return could have been compromised as well. So we're not even allowing that information to be used to change an address. So if the address is changed, the taxpayer should have a forwarding address on file with the post office, and hopefully the payment will catch up there. If not, and the payment is returned to the IRS, we'll hold on to it and we'll be looking for a new address. The best way to update a mailing address right now is to file a tax return. So the 2019 tax return is due on July 15th. The sooner that return is filed, the faster a mailing address could be updated in our system if the return was electronically filed, not paper filed. The only other way would be to submit an address change to the IRS on the applicable form, which I think is in, well, I won't give a form number because I'm not exactly sure if I remember correctly, but uh, it's an address change form. But I can't recommend that right now because we don't have personnel in our processing centers who can handle the mail and process this information. We are building back up to that again, but I can't say for sure that sending something in that manner on paper would get processed timely enough to update an address for the payment. Okay, so can we move on to the next slide? So what is the non-filers interpayment info here tool? That's kind of a long name for an app on irs.gov, but let me go ahead and explain it to you. I've already referred to it a few times. It's a special application created by the IRS and the Free File Alliance for those individuals who didn't have a tax return filing requirement for 2019 or 2018 to not only declare their eligibility for the $1,200 individual payment, as well as the $500 pay for each qualified dependent under age 17, but to also provide financial account information for direct deposit. So the only individuals who would be using this tool now would be individuals having a filing requirement. Well, they would not be using this tool because their gross income doesn't meet the thresholds I previously mentioned. Let me clarify that. I'm not sure that that really came out the way that I intended to. The only individuals, and let's make sure we understand that, who would be using this tool now would be individuals who have a filing requirement because their gross income doesn't meet the thresholds I previously mentioned. So what we have been seeing are people who do have a filing requirement trying to circumvent that tax return filing requirement by using this tool to get the payment. So our systems can pretty much tell whether a person has a filing requirement based upon past filings and income reported on information returns. So again, I would want to reiterate that people who do have a tax return filing requirement should not use this tool. Now, up until April 22nd, we asked Social Security and Railroad retirement beneficiaries who didn't have a filing requirement to use the non-filer tool to declare qualifying dependents. The same for SSI recipients and Veterans Administration recipients up until yesterday, May 5th. So although the beneficiaries and benefits recipients who again didn't have a filing requirement for 2019 or 2018 and who didn't use the tool timely, well, they'll still receive their $1,200 economic impact payment now or imminently, but they'll have to wait until 2021 to file a return for 2020 to claim any additional qualifying dependents for that additional $500 payment per dependent. So if they didn't make the April 22nd deadline or they didn't make the May 5th deadline, then they're going to have to wait until 2021 when they file their 2020 return. So then back to other individuals who didn't have a filing requirement for either 2019 or 2018, they'll be entitled to at least a $1,200 payment for themselves and $500 for each qualifying dependent. If they use the non-filer tool, the tool will request the following basic information to check eligibility, calculate the amount of the payment, and then send the economic impact payments. So need the full names and social security numbers. Remember, only an individual with a social security number can generally claim payment, and that would be for both the individual and the spouse and qualifying dependents, the mailing address, and the financial account type, checking or savings, and the account and routing numbers. So one more time, just to reiterate, the tool should not be used by anyone to circumvent filing a tax return for 2019 or 2018 if they had a filing requirement. Next slide. So the IRS is urging taxpayers to be on the lookout for a surge of calls and email phishing attempts about coronavirus or COVID-19. These contacts can lead to tax-related fraud and identity theft. Taxpayers should watch not only for emails and calls, but text messages, websites, and social media attempts that request money or personal information. Our IRS criminal investigation chief said a few weeks ago, history has shown that criminals take every opportunity to perpetrate a fraud on unsuspecting victims, especially when a group of people is vulnerable or in a state of need. So while you are waiting to hear about your economic impact payment, criminals are working hard to trick you into getting their hands on it. So what are scammers doing? Well, they may emphasize the word stimulus check or stimulus payment. The official term for this is economic impact payment. That's the only term that IRS will use. They may ask you to sign over their economic impact payment check to them. They may ask by phone, email, text, or social media for verification of personal and or banking information, saying that the information is needed to receive or speed up your economic impact payment. They could suggest that you can get a tax refund or economic impact payment faster by working on your behalf. This scam could be conducted by social media or even in person. Remember, you don't have to pay someone to get your economic impact payment. They may mail a bogus check to you, perhaps in an odd dollar amount, and tell you to call a number or verify online information in order to cash it, or tell you that the check was for more than you were entitled and ask you to mail a check to reimburse the difference. So all attempts to get personal information like social security numbers, birth dates, income off of tax returns, and financial account information. You should also be aware that scammers are also able to replicate a government agency's name, even the IRS, and phone number on caller ID. It's important to remember that the IRS will never ask you for personal information or threaten your benefits by phone call, email, text, or social media. If your economic impact payment is stolen, whether by direct theft or by a scam, you should report it to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration on their website. If you receive emails from anyone, including IRS imposters, asking for personal information, such as your social security number, banking information, birth date, financial account information, everything that I just mentioned, with respect to the economic impact payments, you should forward the email to phishing@irs.gov. Phishing is Phishing. Okay, next slide. So we've covered a lot of ground this morning or this afternoon, and you're probably wondering where you can find more information, guidance, and resources. If you navigate to irs.gov homepage, you'll find links to the Economic Impact Payment Information Center, the Get My Payment tool, and the Non-Filer tool. The Economic Impact Payment Information Center has dozens and dozens now, of frequently asked questions about all aspects: eligibility, calculating the amount, receiving the payment, using the Get My Payment tool, and using the non-filer tools. Probably most any question that you can think of asking right now is addressed there. And I see that we have another question in the queue. Let's take a look at that. Not a question. Not a question, but I just went to IRS.gov to look for the FAQs you mentioned. I did not find them yet, but wow, has the homepage changed to make it easier for people to find things. I was just on there last week or so, and it was not as consumer oriented. Well, thank you for that comment. We're trying to make it easier for everybody to navigate to the information they need to facilitate the delivery of these payments. And if you're unable to find the FAQs, I'll pass out an email address where you can contact me later and I can help you navigate there. All right, next slide. So the economic impact payments being direct deposited in mid-April, or they began being direct deposited in mid-April to eligible individuals who had previously filed for 2019 or 2018 and included direct deposit information. We began sending payments to railroad retirement and Social Security retirees toward the end of April and expect to start sending the payments to SSI and Veterans Administration beneficiaries after this week. So last week we began sending checks by mail to 2019 or 2018 filers who haven't provided direct deposit information, and other recipients where we don't have direct deposit information. These checks are going out by mail at the rate of about 5 million per week. You've probably been reading that in the news. And starting with taxpayers who reported the lowest adjusted gross income. As of the beginning of May, we've delivered more than 130 million payments, totaling over $207 billion. But we still have a ways to go with millions more Americans who need to get their payments. We encourage anyone who hasn't filed for 2019, who has a filing requirement, to do so as soon as possible. And for those who don't have a filing requirement, to use the non-filer tool to declare their eligibility for themselves and qualifying dependents. You know, there are many people out there who don't normally file a tax return, and they won't receive an economic impact payment from us unless they take action. These groups include low-income earners, and we're especially concerned about reaching underserved communities, individuals with no income, and the homeless, and households where English isn't the primary language. We don't want to leave anybody behind, and we ask that you share today's information with your business associates, your friends, your family, places of worship, community organizations, anywhere where you think you can help those who may not know how to claim a payment or even have access to an electronic device to use the non-filer tool. We have posters, messages, drop-in articles, and pictorial images that you can use on your social media to get the word out. You can email me and ask for the Economic Impact Payment Partner Toolkit. And I'd also be glad to repeat this presentation for any organization who can reach an audience that would benefit from today's information. And so let me go ahead and take this one last question. Oh, great, she found the FAQs. Great web design, kudos to all. Thank you, whoever you are out there, we appreciate that. I wanted to end today by giving a little bit of an update about what's going on with the Internal Revenue Service. Just like so many of you who've experienced stay-at-home orders, most of the employees at the IRS have as well. Some of us live in states where there are legal orders to stay at home. Most locations of the Internal Revenue Service, including service centers, have been under evacuation orders, non-entry orders, for the last number of weeks since all of this started. And so a lot of our services, especially over the telephone, had been suspended and temporarily halted. We know that there's a great need out there to get information other than from our website, and people want to talk to people. I would like to say that we've had a lot of brave individuals in the IRS who have continued working at offices and service centers in mission critical operations that were mostly internal, but we are now bringing people back to work in offices and service centers this week and next week to try to gear up some of our telephone service again and start processing the mail that's been coming in, tax return, paper tax returns, and that sort of thing. So as of right now, there are literally no telephone services that are open, but again, we're hoping to start resurrecting some of those services in the very near future. And finally, if anybody wants to contact me to get some of this promotional information regarding the payment that you can share personally or with your business colleagues and on your social media, you can contact me at Marc, M-A-R-C, .zine, Z like in zebra, I-N-E, at irs.gov. And I think we don't have any more questions that I'm seeing here in the queue, so I'll turn this back over to our host, Chris Williams from the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Marc. Yes, you addressed some of the questions that Consumer Affairs has been receiving, and that's, when are they going to get their, their stimulus check, and, they're not able to to get through to the IRS. So you address some of those issues. I appreciate that because that does help as far as the people that are listening in and the staff at Consumer Affairs. And so thank you, Mark, for that information. It was very informational. And I appreciate the email address you provided for our viewers so they can contact you if they have any more questions. I hope we found this informational. I know I did. And there's more webinars to come and more information. Now, as I mentioned, we do have calls coming in regarding that, those types of questions that were being asked. You can contact Consumer Affairs at website consumeraffairs.nv.gov, or you can also call us at 702-486-2750. If you have any more questions, please give us a call. We do try to help the consumers out there with questions, with the IRS questions. Also, we're getting calls with Department of Employment questions. We try to do our best to help and assist. Again, call us at 702-486-2750. And I see that there isn't any more questions. We can go ahead and end this webinar. Again, we thank everyone for showing up and attending this webinar, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for tuning in, and thank you, Mark, for your awesome presentation.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, I think there's a question, or is that an old one? Oh, they wanted to repeat the email?
Be glad to. It's Marc, M-A-R-C, not a K, dot Z like in zebra, I-N-E, at irs.gov.
Okay, and I want to add again that not only does the IRS have, the .gov have a lot of information, Consumer Affairs also has information as far as common scams that we're seeing, and it's very informational. So please take a look at our website, and if there's any questions, again, just give us a call. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.